with a warning label. It would read as follows. Caution, what you are about to hear may make you think about disturbing historical realities. It may stir your emotion and perhaps even make you uncomfortable. It may inspire you to act and engage. As Rotary leaders, people of action, working to make peace, right wrongs, and promote civility. Side effects may include goodwill and better friendship, future partnership and collaboration with people underrepresented in Rotary, being part of something that is noble, necessary, and long overdue, and being known for standing as Rotarians on moral principle and high ideals. As Nancy said, I'm District Governor-elect Roger Utnamer. I'm also a member of the Wausau After Hours Rotary Club. One of Rotary's 7 areas of focus, one of our 7 major priorities, is promoting peace and resolving conflict. The Rotary 4-way test encourages us all to build goodwill and better friendship. And as I approach the start of my year of district leadership, I can think of no place that is more appropriate to build goodwill and better friendship, to promote peace and foster conflict resolution than with our American Indian neighbors. Every Rotary Club in the United States is located on land that was formerly occupied by American Indians, people from whom much has been taken: land, language, culture, children, self-determination, images, and more. We are here together to learn how we can stand for something bold and important. And I thank you very much for participating in this cultural appreciation initiative. Now, our speaker, Dr. Patricia Loew, is a member of the Red Band of Lake Superior Ojibwe. Make that Bad River.
Thank you.
She was born in Milwaukee, got her bachelor's from UW La Crosse and a master's degree and a PhD from UW-Madison. If I shared everything that's on her curriculum vitae, it would take the entire 45 minutes that we have together this afternoon. So let it suffice to say that Patty is a prolific author, a documentarian, a broadcaster, an educator, and a role model for many. You may know her from being the host of Weekend many years on Wisconsin Public Television. And Patty was recently voted into the Wisconsin Broadcasters Hall of Fame. My thanks, Patty, for your kindness joining us. Congratulations on your admission to the Wisconsin Broadcasters Hall of Fame. And I would like to start by asking you about your expertise and prowess playing lacrosse.
Well, can I first say, Roger, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, but also the way you set out what Rotary's values and mission is. I really appreciated that. And I've long admired Rotarians. I've had an opportunity to be a guest at luncheons, and I've spoken to a few Rotary Club luncheons, and I really appreciate what your club stands for. So let me first say that. And you see the lacrosse stick over my shoulder. I have been steeped in lacrosse the last couple of years, helping the Field Museum with its new lacrosse exhibit. Bagataway is what we call it in Ojibwe. And it's the first of 5 rotating exhibits that are in the Native Truths exhibit. But I don't really play. I have done a documentary about it, and I'm a cheerleader for the sport. But as far as what I can do with a stick and a ball is probably not much more than what I suspect you can do with a stick and a ball.
Well, I had a call today from a friend in Madison who said, if you're going to be talking to Patty Loew, be sure you ask her about lacrosse. And he did not mean the city.
Right, right. Well, I got my bachelor's degree in lacrosse, so I'm a fan of that city too.
Right.
But I was lucky enough to be a guest on Larry Mueller's show yesterday on the Wisconsin Ideas Network, and that was the topic, was lacrosse. So I've been living, breathing, and eating lacrosse for the last couple of years.
Why don't we start by having you have an opportunity to tell us anything about you that I have not already mentioned?
Well, you mentioned that I was born in Milwaukee, and I don't remember meeting another, other than my relatives, another Native person in the housing project that I grew up in. It was a very diverse housing project. There were African American and Puerto Rican and Mexican and a lot of Greek Orthodox kids, as I remember, but no Native Americans. And I didn't really have a sense of my Native American identity until I was maybe 11 or so. And I would go up to the Loew reservation for summers to spend with my Aunt Bunny and Uncle Ace, the Indians. And it wasn't until I was in middle school that I realized, well, hey, if I've got an aunt and an uncle who are Native, maybe I have too. So a lot of what I learned, first of all, I didn't learn anything in school about Native people other than Paleolithic hunters migrating across the barren land bridge. And then we kind of dropped out until the French fur trade. And then we totally dropped out of history books. So a lot of what I learned from books and wonderful authors like Vine Deloria, who wrote Custer Died for Your Sins. And that really opened up my eyes at a time when a lot of people were searching for identity during the 60s, which were pretty turbulent.
Well, and you're also noted as being a very highly regarded author yourself. Might you tell us about your books, why you wrote them, and what you hoped to accomplish?
Sure. Well, my first book was the reason I didn't get tenure in the UW history department, because I worked on that instead of my dissertation, which I knew maybe 5 people my committee was going to read and probably nobody else. It was pretty esoteric. But in 1996, the state started to gear up for its sesquicentennial we became a state in 1848. Yeah, so 98. 98 was the sesquicentennial. And the state was making all these plans to celebrate the prosperity of the state and its good fortune and the, brilliance of its people. And then almost as an afterthought, somebody said, what about the first people of this state? So the people who organized it kind of rushed to try to fill that void. And I agreed to help create a walkthrough public history display that featured all 12 Native nations in Wisconsin. And I was basically a wordsmith for the 12 Native communities. And I traveled around and found out what they wanted to say about themselves. And out of that, it was a wonderful experience for me. And people kept telling me, why don't you write a book about the 12 nations, 1 chapter each? And there wasn't a book like that out there. So I wrote that instead of publishing my dissertation. Oh, and that's the children's book. And I'll tell you, Roger, I'm so glad you're holding that up, because my kids just recently asked me, what is the thing in my career that I'm most proud of? And that's it right there, a 4th grade reader. About this time, the state was going through a really turbulent chapter around treaty rights. And there was a lot of miseducation and misinformation. And my kids were coming home from school with really dreadful material.
It's up all the way.
I think I'm getting some feedback here. I think maybe it ended. I don't know. Maybe people aren't muted. But anyway, so I write this general history book for the Wisconsin Historical Society Press. And teachers started using it because about this time, during the middle of all this violence over spearfishing, the legislature passed a law called Act 31, which was an educational mandate that required that every Wisconsin school kid learned about Wisconsin Indian history, treaty rights, and sovereignty 3 times in the K-12 experience, and set up certification standards for teachers. So teachers were using my book as their reference and said, where's, what we really need is a kid's book. So I wrote a 4th grade textbook, and I tell you, I think about, the book came out in the early 2000s, and I think about now how those 4th graders are becoming business people, they're becoming lawyers and doctors and educators and judges. And this book was written in collaboration with the 12 Native communities. And they tell me they feel like it's an authentic representation of who they are. And so that's really gratifying to me. I've written other books, but this is the one that I'm most proud of.
Well, and I've read it, and I suggest that all of us who are parents or grandparents bribe their family members with device time for every minute allocated to reading your book.
Thanks, Roger.
And it really will help anyone in Rotary that's interested in building goodwill and better friendship to have a better understanding of the reality that was not taught in many schools for the first few centuries of experience here in the United States. Now, Patty, I mentioned that one of Rotary's major priorities is resolving conflict. Mm-hmm. And I would like to name a potential issue or conflict and ask you to comment on it with the understanding that you can pass on anything that you don't want to talk about. So let me just start by saying land into trust.
Yeah, that's a big issue.
To know about that?
Yeah, well, you have to know a little bit of history. The problems began in 1889 or 1887 with the General Allotment Act, or the Dawes Act. And basically it was the government's attempt to break up all these expensive reservations. And on the one hand, you had Christian reformers who thought the best future for Native people was to assimilate. And then you had the Western land expansionists who said, if we break up these reservations, we can get land. So all the reservations, with few exceptions, the Menominee being one, were allotted. And my grandfather was allotted 80 acres in northern Wisconsin on the Bad River Reservation. This happened all over the country. Once every tribal member had 80 acres, the rest was opened up for and given free to homesteaders. And in kind of a checkerboard fashion, the idea was, well, our vision for Native people, forget that they were hunter, fisher, gatherers, we're going to turn them into farmers, whether the land was suitable for farming or not. They were going to be farmers, and they're going to live next to these good Protestant farmers with a good work ethic. And then we won't have an Indian problem because they'll all assimilate. So fast forward now through some really rough times for Native people and communities, really struggling with poverty and all kinds of issues and land loss. Because what happened when the land was opened up, what do Native people know about mortgages or liens or, any of that kind of thing? So many of them were really duped out of their land, or, traded it for trinkets, and so there was this great bloodletting of land. On the Oneida Reservation, which is near Green Bay, and was a very, that land was really popular because there was a port there. Eventually there was an airport, there was a fort. So the Oneida lost 98% of their land. Bad River, my reservation, we were a little bit more remote. We only lost 65% of our land. But this tells you how, as the state became more prosperous, Native nations became more impoverished. Well, then there's gaming. that arose in the 1980s. And finally, there was money to put into local economies because, and this is just kind of an aside, but we don't own our land. Our land is held in trust for us by the federal government. We can't use it for collateral to go to a bank and say, lend me some money, here's my allotment, because allotments can't be sold. I mean, it's held in trust. So we were really impoverished until the late 1980s when the National Indian Gaming Regulatory Act was passed. Now there's, money coming into our economies, and tribes are building health clinics, they're building senior housing, they're doing Meals on Wheels programs, and they're buying back land that was lost through this allotment process. So they're buying land that's culturally important or might have importance for economic advancement. But every time a piece of land comes off the tax rolls from the local municipality, because our tribes are overlaid onto counties and townships and cities and the state. So every time the tribe buys a piece of land back, that reduces the overall property tax base and increases the burden for individual taxpayers. This is a problem that's happening all over the country as tribes become more prosperous and they start buying back their land. What the Oneida have done, I think, is a really good model for conflict resolution. Every time the Oneida buy back land that was part of their original reservation, but now it's creating some kind of a tax burden for somebody else, they create service agreements with the town of Ashwaubenon or the city of Green Bay or De Pere or any one of the townships that the Oneida reservation overlays. And for every dollar in tax loss, what the Oneida do is provide services. So they'll do they'll provide fire service, or they'll fix roads, or they'll, any number of things that happen on the county or municipal level, they will, on an equal basis, reimburse the local township for that lost tax base.
Now, land into trust leads right into road easements in Lac de Flambeau.
Yeah, I haven't been following that issue. I lived in Chicago until just recently. I was helping to set up and then direct a center there. And it's not that it's politically awkward to talk about it. I just don't feel like I have enough information to talk about that issue.
Mascots,
and I'll tell you, it's always Rotary clubs where I could be speaking on any topic. And when there's questions, there's always somebody in the back. And the question always goes like this. I want to ask you about mascots because I came from a high school. There's always this preamble. I came from a high school that had an Indian mascot, and we were always really proud of it. And we saw it as something, the qualities of that native warrior were something that we thought were really positive. And so, we really felt good about having this, a native mascot. How do you feel about it? That's always the way the question went. And what I said once at a Rotary Club meeting was, say you have a beloved relative, an aunt maybe, who sends you a present for the holiday, and you open it up and there's a lime green leisure suit with fuzzy bunnies on it. And she insists that you put it on, that you wear it. And you are looking at this thing and you're just mortified. You don't want to wear this. I mean, it's just, but still, you understand that your aunt has the best of intentions. But in the end, who gets to decide whether you have to wear that atrocious lime green leisure suit? Do you have the right to say, no, this isn't something that I want. I'm not comfortable with this. I don't want to wear this label or this mascot or this leisure suit. or the person who's saying, we're doing this with the best of intentions, we're honoring you, so wear the darn thing. I think the answer for most people would be pretty clear. And, you know, there was a really poorly constructed Washington Post survey that was done when everything, the wrath of the world was coming down on the Washington professional football team. And let me tell you, that word, Redskins, that word came out of the bounties that were on Native men, women, and children during the California Gold Rush. And there was a $1 bounty on men, Native men, a 50-cent bounty on every woman, Native woman killed, and a 25-cent bounty on every child. And it was too cumbersome to bring the entire bodies, so they brought the genitals. And that's where that word comes from. That's why it's, you know, it's, people went apoplectic about it. And I should say, this is an Algonquin. There are lots of tribes that have the Algonquin language. Not every tribe has this same meaning attached to it, but this was the meaning that Native people who spoke an Algonquin-based language have. So, where was I? Mascots. Anyway, this is the Washington Post survey. Yes. So they did this survey that was really poorly constructed. Any communication specialist would tell you this was that they called up people, asked them if they were Native. People could self-identify, and if the survey researchers had known anything about Native people, they'd know that only at that time, like fewer than 30% had landlines. So, and people were identifying, you know, based on my grandfather might have been a Cherokee princess. There have been other surveys that have been done that show that a vast majority of Native people do not want to be mascots. Sorry for that long-winded.
No, that's quite all right. This time is yours. Broken treaties.
Boy, you know, the classic one right now, what goes around comes around. First of all, treaties are promises between sovereign groups, sovereign nations. And the treaties that the United States government signed with Native nations in, you know, the 16, 17, 18 centuries, 19th centuries too, the United States recognized that this was land that was possessed by these sovereign groups, and that if they wanted it, they wanted to buy it or they wanted to take it, they needed to sit down and treat with them as sovereigns. There's a line in the US Constitution that says treaties are the supreme law of the land. So I think it's, you know, without getting too political, right now we have a situation where my tribe is embroiled in a lawsuit with Enbridge over the Line 5 pipeline. And the Enbridge lawyers and Canada and people who are pro the pipeline have said, well, we have this energy treaty with Canada signed in 1977. Well, hello, the treaties that the United States signed with the Ojibwe began in 1836, 37, 1842, and 1854. So, you know, we have a situation where if the Canada treaty is privileged, then that means this treaty is going to be broken with my group, and it preceded the Canada Energy Treaty by 125 years or more. So, and you know, and my tribe isn't unique. There are a lot of broken treaties, and you know, Native people aren't unique. And the United States has broken treaties with other sovereign nations in Europe and, you know, Africa and South America as well.
Might you explain the components of treaties that are based on a misunderstanding that land was being loaned to be shared with the U.S. government, not taken over?
You know, I haven't visited all 573 federally recognized nations, but the native nations that I have been familiar with, that I visited, that I have a relationship with, none of them have a concept of ownership. That's a very, that's a construct that we imported from Europe that was brought with European settlers. Spain was interested in gold, the French were interested in trade, and the English were interested in land. And in Native communities, land is thought of as something that you use, that you occupy, but it's not something that, the land is going to be here a lot longer than you are. So the idea of owning a piece of the earth was very foreign. And this was one of the, great disconnects in these treaty negotiations, because we didn't have that, we weren't talking the same language.
Bullying and racism.
Bullying and racism in, do you want me to, they're bad. I mean, that's a huge topic. In what sense?
The reality. What is the reality today, being an American Indian woman, an American Indian man in northern Wisconsin? I've come to understand that some bullying has moved to the internet. It's gone from the boat landings and the school hallways onto the internet, and there's cyber bullying.
Yeah.
But I think it's important for those of us that want to foster better understanding to hear from people like you what the experience of racism is today in the United States.
Well, I mean, if you look at me, I don't think you would say immediately, oh, there's an American Indian woman. I have kind of this, is she Mediterranean? Is she Jewish? Is she Latina? I don't think that somebody would look at me, unless I was wearing my powwow regalia, and say that's a Native American, and I'm gonna, I'm gonna throw shade on her. And I want to believe that some of the racism that bubbled up during the walleye wars has dissipated through education, and because people connected, if not after the boat landings. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, if I can just make a slight detour here, that you have this ambivalence on the boat landings. There was violence, people weren't talking. Then there's this Act 31, which kind of mitigated it a little bit, and we start to educate younger generations. But then after the walleye wars, you had Exxon coming in, wanting to build what would have been North America's largest, or one of the largest, if not the largest, sulfide mine at Crandon. And a lot of the hunters and fishing guides and resort owners took a look at that and saw real economic ruin potential, and saw the only thing standing between them and, the collapse of the northern Wisconsin economy in that area was Indian treaty rights. And so there were these really interesting coalitions that formed, and a lot of that grew out of some of our we had some Native chairs and legislators who went to local gun clubs and shot skeet with some of the locals, and people started to talk, and you find this kind of common ground. And when individuals connect, then the groups that they belong to connect, and that's when things grow, and people start seeing not only the common denominators of threats, but also common denominators for potential. I look at northern Wisconsin, and the reason we love it so much is because of the quality of life, the beautiful environment, the clean water, clean air. That's something that everybody wants for themselves and for their children. And if you look at tourism patterns, tourists want, increasingly, they want outdoor activities, they want cultural experiences. And that's something that goes beyond reservation borders. That's something where you can get a collection of business people from Ashland and Ironwood and Hurley together with Bad River and come up with some really interesting economic opportunities. And if you look at some of the casinos throughout the state, the last time I looked, more than 60% of the employees were not native people. They were non-Indians who were being employed. And those casinos were generating, for every dollar spent there, it was generating into the local economies, and people were buying gas at the local, gas station. They were staying in hotels. They were spending money at restaurants. They were taking day trips. So, I know later you sent me some of the questions that you wanted to ask, and you asked me if I was optimistic. I am really optimistic because I see so much economic potential as well as cultural understanding.
Patty, what are your thoughts on land acknowledgement statements? And for those that have not heard that term, Rotary conferences that I've attended in Australia and recently in Orlando started by stating that we esteem and respect the American Indian people on whose land we have settled, and we thank them for preserving and protecting the land on which we are meeting today.
Yeah, really powerful words. Better when words are followed by action. The land acknowledgements have really caught on. They were developed with the best of intentions, and I think they're still important to remind people that we are enjoying our quality of life because of decisions that were made by our ancestors. But I think it's more important that those words be a jumping off point for action. So, when I was in Chicago, I would hear land acknowledgements at Steppenwolf Theater, and and some of them actually chose plays that had Native themes in them, and they started really looking to try to hire Native actors. That to me is what a land acknowledgement should do. It should create that spark so that we start thinking about how we can truly honor and incorporate Native philosophies and Native people into our everyday kinds of activities.
Piscataway Greg Johnson from Lac du Flambeau.
Fabulous. Love that guy.
And he told me that he has nothing but deep respect and admiration that you helped propel him on the course of action that he's pursuing today.
Wow.
When I asked Piscataway about land acknowledgement statements, he said, yeah, they're okay, but give us back our land.
Someone once told me that it's kind of like you have a roommate who comes into your bedroom and steals your laptop, and then comes to you and says, well, I took your laptop, but it's okay now because I told you I took it. So yeah, following it up with action is really, I think, really important.
Before we open up the floor for other questions, I have one last and very important question for you. And that is, what can we do in Rotary to foster peace, resolve conflict, and build goodwill and better friendship?
What a beautiful question, Roger. I think it all starts with one-on-one interactions. You have to understand that, from 1492 on, when non-native people show up at a reservation and say we're here to help, or bad things happen, we lose our land, or we lose our kids, or we lose something. And so, I sense this reticence in some of my communities, people really joining, more mainstream clubs because of past discrimination or past injustice, or just, fear. So I think if Rotarians really, this is a good start, inviting Greg, who's wonderful, and I hope that, this is beneficial. My presence is beneficial to your members, but, go to our powwows. Powwows are such a fun activity, and, we judge the success of them not by how many of our people show up, but by how many other people we're able to draw in. You will always be welcome at a powwow. That's a really great low, low tension. There's no tension. Great place to eat, enjoy some food, listen to some music, meet new people. That's a good place. Go to open houses at our, all of our tribes have events. We revere our veterans. If you're a veteran and you show up on our reservation, you're going to be elevated to a status that you've never experienced before. So I think inviting, and once you reach out and make the effort to go to Indian country, then inviting them to some of your events, I think that's a great way to start.
I noticed that Norbert Hill is on the call, and he will be joining us speaking to. I'll let you two say hello to each other. Norbert. He may be the most gracious, welcoming person I have met in many, many years, because he gave me a tour of the Oneida Nation, including the old seminary building where I studied to be a Catholic priest and only quit when I realized the Pope would never negotiate celibacy.
Oh, what a great line. I love that.
Welcome, Norbert. He will be speaking at the April 20th meeting of Rotarians from throughout the entire Midwest, along with Artley Scannendor, the principal of the Oneida Nation High School. So yes. We are learning, and we're listening, and we're hoping to be sensitive and respectful. And we are not afraid in Rotary to try to be bold, to do some noble things, to stand on some high values, and look at some very important ideals that we can pursue and realize together. And for that, I thank you. I thank Biskakane, and certainly Norbert, for his incredible warm hospitality and the generous allocation of his time that he shared with me touring the Oneida Nation. So,
Roger, I brought my Northwestern students to the Oneida Reservation every fall to help the White Corn Cooperative bring in their harvest. And it was transformative for my students. And the Oneida were so kind and welcoming. And Norbert usually always joined us for dinner and did a lecture.
And a question for all of you is, from where do you find your ability to be so forgiving and so gracious and welcoming to those of us who represent much of what has been taken from you and your people?
Well, I mean, at some point, the past, you can't do anything about the past. You can just move forward. And you hold the anger in your heart, and you hold resentment, that doesn't do anybody, including yourself, any good. So, as a journalist, I've always been sort of solution oriented. So, and that's a thing now, solution journalism, they gave it a name. So it was never enough for me to just point out the warts, societal warts. I always wanted to find something or some place or some person who was doing it better, and so that's kind of the way I've always moved forward.
Would you come back and visit with us again in the future?
Oh, absolutely.
Good. Good.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll definitely see you on June 20th when you're inducted officially into the Wisconsin Broadcasters Hall of Fame.
I guess the list of nominees was pretty thin this year.
It was absolutely not. There were many. In fact, there were as many as we've ever had. But I have to tell you that you are one of the rare people selected on the very first time they were nominated. So for that, I congratulate you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Now,
Roger, we do have a question in the chat, so I'll kick that off because I know folks wanna ask questions. So when looking at Lakota Indians and the bison, can other tribes do something similar for ecotourism and bringing communities together? There was a documentary on PBS with Ken Burns, The American Buffalo, excellent, that highlighted the significance of the bison to North American tribes. This is what has us asking the question. So thanks.
Yeah, there's an intertribal bison association that has provided bison that wander off Yellowstone, and some of the ranchers in the area are really concerned about brucellosis and some other cattle diseases. So the Intertribal Bison Association has been providing bison. That's one thing going on. But these intertribal producers organizations are showing up everywhere. There's an intertribal maple syrup producers association with tribes from Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan that are sharing equipment and marketing their maple syrup together. There are other food sovereignty groups that are popping up and trying to reestablish some of the old Indian trade associations. There's some really exciting things going on in the world of cooperatives and around indigenous foods, because our communities suffer from tremendous rates of diabetes and other things associated with a non-traditional diet. So we're trying to go back to our original foods and connect with other communities who are trying to do the same thing. I think there's opportunities for regional cooperatives involving native and non-native food producers that could be doing some really interesting things. And I also think that there's a lot of excitement around alternative energy right now. My tribe invested some of its COVID money in creating some solar farms. We have our health clinic is powered by our one solar farm. We have another one attached to our wastewater treatment center, another one at our fish hatchery, another one on our admin building. So that's kind of exciting. And now there are these sort of there's a growing movement around community solar collectives that are not run by utilities, but communities and neighborhoods. So that's something where I see a lot of potential. And then ecotourism, absolutely. And I'll just say that I think we're finally starting to realize that climate change is a real thing. And native tribes have been adjusting to climate change since the last ice age. We know a few things, and we're willing to share that knowledge. And so whether it's trying to figure out when to plant Christmas trees or the right kind of trees for your Christmas tree farm, or whether it's organizing trips through the Kakagan sloughs and looking at the wild rice and learning more about the animals we're all trying to protect. I think there's a lot of potential for ecotourism, cultural tourism, and just tourism in general.
You mentioned climate change, and that makes me think about what I've learned from you tonight, from Biscockany, Greg Johnson, and certainly from Norbert Hill. And that is that our indigenous native peoples were the first environmentalists.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Roger, I think it's really helpful sometimes to think about and be willing to understand there are different ways of knowing, knowing the natural world. You can look at our air and water and trees and the critters in it as commodities, or you can look at them as relatives and understand that we're all part of that. I know that Norbert's tribe, the Oneida, have the notion of a seventh generation philosophy, which I think is really important. When we grow up, we're taught that when you make a decision, you should be thinking about whether that decision is in the best interest of generations in the future. I know the Oneida think about 3 generations in the future, the present generation, and 3 generations past. Some other tribes think about it as 7 generations, or like 240 years in the future. But what it does is to remind us to be willing to sacrifice for the betterment of our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But it also causes us to look backwards and realize that the quality of life we have and our way, just the way of life that we still have, is because of decisions that were made by our ancestors. And so we have gratitude for that as well. And I think when you think about the really wicked problems that we have on this planet, homelessness, climate change, poverty, that really requires all of us to be thinking. I mean, we have to have long-range vision to solve those kinds of problems. And yet our mainstream society is organized around short-term gratification. Our political system is 2, 4, and 6 years. Our business cycles are on 4 quarters. And so there's this, get it now because you have to get yourself reelected, or you have to say what you have to say what the people want in order to get reelected, or you have to get your business margins, or you're out, in the 3rd quarter. And so these are 2 worldviews that really are in conflict right now. And I truly believe that mainstream society should really take a hard look at the way some Native people view their natural world and the future.
That brings up the progress Wisconsin is making by a State of the Tribes address. But I'm aware that the state of Maine has designated a non-voting Native American seat in their state legislature. And I'm wondering if the Great Lakes Tribal Council is considered asking that a DNR board seat be designated for Native American, and if it's possible to pursue an American Indian seat in our state legislature.
Oh, that would be great. I'm all for that, but I'd rather have it be a voting membership than a non-voting member.
Right.
And I mean, the Natural Resources Board is nominated by the governor, who has nominated Native folks. And again, I don't want to get political, but those appointments have been turned back. So Dylan Jennings, who would have been on the Natural Resources Board, was not, his appointment was not, and the others were not approved by the legislature.
Other questions?
Patty, there's one more question in the chat. Has there been any partnership with hunter safety groups to teach the culture of respect for land and for taking the life of an animal that provides food for your family? That's a great question.
It is a great question, and there should be. I know tribes have hunter safety programs. I don't know whether there are partnerships, but that sounds like a really great idea. And I would start with the short video featuring Piscataway called The Ways. It's www.theways.org. It's a series of programs created by Wisconsin Public, the Educational Board of Wisconsin. And it's absolutely beautiful. There's a video from each of the communities, And the one from Lac du Flambeau features Greg, and it's just wonderful.
Do we have time to continue, Patty? I know we were gonna
Yeah.
wrap up at 4:45. Okay. So Fran Finley, our friend Fran, is up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. She has 3 topics. She's wondering if you want to comment on any of them or all of them. Off-reservation adoption, fishing rights, and missing Indigenous women.
Oh boy, those are really 3
That's a
big.
whole nother session, right?
Yeah, I mean, but they're, you know, the missing and murdered Indigenous women issue is real, and it's incredible how few Native women's names are in the FBI's database compared to the number of actual missing people. The fishing rights ongoing, that might be too big to comment on. The third one was adoption. Between 1950 and 1974, 35% of Native children were either adopted or fostered out into primarily non-Native families. It's something that not a lot of people know about. It was halted by the Indian Child Welfare Act, which is under assault right now. You might want to, if you're interested in this topic, oh, what's the name? Sandy Whitehawk was in it. It's the Dawn. Do you know the person that asked the question? There's a really wonderful documentary that was that appeared on Frontline. There's another Frontline documentary that was done by it's horrible getting old and your mind. Yeah, I'm having a Mark Trahant. Mark Trahant did the Frontline documentary about no, that was sexual assault of Indian children in Alaska. My mind's a jumble. Yeah, you give me those big topics and I could talk for an hour on each one of those, but there's some really good documentaries out there. There's the documentary about something about the Dawn. It follows the Truth and Reconciliation Councils in Canada. And if you Google non-Indian adoptions and Truth and Reconciliation, you'll find it. There's another one called Stitching the Threads or Missing Threads. That's a Wisconsin-based documentary about adopted Native children. That really explains the Indian Child Welfare Act. Missing Threads, and you can access that or this other one if you Google Truth and Reconciliation and Indian adoptions. On fishing, I would go to the Glifwick website, Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife. It's GLIF, Glifwick, GLIFWC.org. There are videos, there's lots of really great explanations, there's full text reports, peer-reviewed journal articles about fishing rights in the Great Lakes. That is wonderful. And then the last one was Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. Boy, there's a lot of material out there. One of the things that I'm really grateful for, Deb Haaland, who's our Secretary of the Interior, when she was in the House, she and another Native woman sponsored legislation to address the administration nightmare that has really been the missing and murdered Indigenous women's issue. One of the really important impediments to law enforcement, effective law enforcement. I think one of them was the Savannah Act. So there's a lot there too. And she really prioritized Indian boarding schools and MMIW issues as Secretary of the Interior. And I think there's a lot of Native people who are really grateful to her.
Thank you, Patty. So Cody commented, Ojibwe member from Michigan UP, and he loved Fran's question. So thank you, Cody. And Angela
Uju,
commented,
Cody.
yeah. And Angela commented, daughter of a lost bird document.
Yeah, Lost
Documentary.
Bird. Yeah, that's Lost Bird was the child who survived the Wounded Knee massacre in 1890, and it kind of chronicles the, you know, how Native American children have been kidnapped, placed in boarding schools, adopted out. Yeah, that's a really good documentary. Thank you. Miigwech, Cody.
Roger, I'll hand it back to you.
Well, Patty, I can't thank you enough. And I think that we've got a plan to implement your suggestions. And certainly there is a deep desire to learn much more than is possible in 45 to 60 minutes like this tonight. But I think that if we move forward and start reaching out more, offering opportunities for Rotary Youth Leadership Academy experience to our Indigenous neighbors, if we invite participation in Rotary Youth Exchange and start more collaboration, having discussion groups on the books and the documentaries that you recommended, that we may really accomplish something positive and measurable and be known for building peace between people where that is overdue, it's necessary, and it's important. So with that, I say my deep gratitude, and I certainly see why your curriculum vitae is 26 pages long.
Thank you, Patty.
Thank
you so
you.
much. Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Thanks, Nancy.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
If I can help anyone promote this discussion in your own clubs, please let me know, because it will be a major priority in the year ahead. Thank you.
Roger, can you hold that book up again?
Sure.
Would
It's
you mind?
Native
I missed it.
People,
You did it so fast.
Native People of Wisconsin
Okay, thank you.
by Patty Loew, Loew.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, good night.
Thank you,
Nancy.
Nancy. All right.